Hey, good evening, everybody. I wanted to make sure that if you weren't here this morning, that you were still able to participate with us as we start looking at the book and person of Jonah. Now, Jonah is found in the Old Testament prophets, but it's an interesting book because while it's a book of prophecy, which doesn't mean psychic readings or all that kind of stuff that sometimes we think it means, but it's how God is sharing his messages with his people. In this whole book, found in the prophets section, Jonah, who is a prophet, only speaks one verse that we can consider a prophetic saying. One verse out of the whole book. Instead, it is a book that looks at how does this prophet of God interact with the God who calls him. And so what is it about that relationship with God that we should be paying attention to? Is there something in there that maybe we could learn about ourselves and how we interact with God in the midst of what's going on? So, what happens at the very beginning of the story is that Jonah hears from God. He hears from him, and it says, "The word of the Lord came to Jonah, son of Amittai. Go to the great city of Nineveh and preach against it, because its wickedness had come up before me." Now, if you wanted to go someplace that had wickedness, Nineveh was the place to go. I mean, they were known for their brutal conquests of other people. They would poison water supplies to take over places. They would force labor of those they had conquered. And they loved to develop things like psychological warfare and torture practices. In fact, there's records of the Ninevites putting people on the city wall that they had captured so that just the average everyday citizen that happened to live there could go and torture and mutilate them in public for everyone to see. This was the kind of place that locals didn't necessarily like to go. And now Jonah was called by God to go to that very place. Talk about an assignment. And so Jonah gets this word and he starts running right away. And for those of us that are used to the nice Bible stories, we usually expect someone to run where God calls them to go when they take off in such a way like that. But instead of running towards Nineveh, Jonah gets on a boat to head in the opposite direction to this town called Tarshish. It's about as far away on a map as you could get at that time. And we don't know exactly why Jonah wanted to run away like that. Maybe he was confused as to why God would want anything to do with these Ninevites in the first place. I mean, didn't he know that they had hurt, killed, and conquered Jonah's people, God's chosen people? Maybe he just felt inadequate, like, who am I to go and try and do something in that place? Or maybe he just thought he had a better plan, because there's always the possibility that although the things that Nineveh had done to Israel had affected Jonah's attitude towards them. And if he preached, if he shared a word from God, then maybe, just maybe, they might respond and God might show mercy to them. And so he had a better plan. If I run away and go in the opposite direction, then there's no way that God's mercy can get to them and they'll just burn to the ground. God will be able to smite them. They'll be able to pay for all of the things that they have done, and things will be how they're supposed to be. And so he races away towards Tarshish in order to take control of his own life, right? Because that's where we go when all of our excuses win out. It's where we go when we rationalize our ability to do what we want to do instead of what God has called us to do. It's home. It's home to the places we end up when we have lied to ourselves and believe we know better than the one who's created us. And so Jonah goes there fully believing that he could run away from the presence and calling of God. And he's willing to pay the price of the ticket to do it. The problem is, as he's running, he keeps having to pay more and more and more. It says that the Lord sent a great wind on the sea, and such a violent storm arose that the ship threatened to break apart. All the sailors were afraid, and each cried out to his own God, and they threw the cargo into the sea to lighten the ship. But Jonah had gone below deck, where he laid down and fell asleep into a deep sleep. The captain went to him and said, "How can you sleep? Get up, call on your God. Maybe he will take notice of us, and we will not perish." And then the sailors said to each other, "Come, let us cast lots to find out who is responsible for this calamity." They cast lots, and the lot fell on Jonah. So they asked him, "Tell us, who's responsible for making all this trouble? What do you do? Where do you come from? What's your country? What people are you?" He answered, "I'm a Hebrew, and I worship the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the land." And this terrified them, and they asked what he'd done. The sea was getting rougher and rougher, so they asked him, "What should we do to make the sea calm down for us?" "Pick me up and throw me into the sea," he replied, "and it will become calm. I know that it is my fault that this great storm has come upon you." Instead, the men did their best to row back to land, but they could not, for the sea grew even wilder than before. Then they cried to the Lord, "O Lord, please do not let us die for taking this man's life. Do not hold us accountable for killing an innocent man. For you, O Lord, have done as you please." And then they took Jonah and they threw him overboard, and the raging seas grew calm. Did you catch everything that he had to pay for? He had to buy the ticket, and then he had to pay for his safety and others. He had to pay for damages to the ship. He had to pay for lost cargo. He had to pay for the fear of their very lives that they were going through. And he also had to pay for the fact that he was not who he thought he was. He had gone on this trip as a respected Hebrew, a prophet, one that God calls on. In fact, he was known as the Son of Truth. And yet he found himself a coward who hid underneath the ship while everyone else is praying and crying out to God and trying to save everybody else. He's just sleeping away. When it's time to find out who is the cause of this, he knows, and yet he waits for them to cast lots. Because maybe something will happen and he'll have to get out of it. He is not who he thought he was. He is the one that, for whatever reason, believed that he could run away from God, run away from the one who loves him and is for him, and his life would be better than if he had gone where God called him to go. And so he believes the only option left is just to stop running, to jump into the sea, not thinking that there will be a life raft or a jet ski sitting there waiting for him to zoom off to Nineveh, but to sink to the bottom of the ocean and die. Because when you are as broken and as flawed as he has been revealed to be, what else is there for you to do? And at least maybe the crew and the men will be saved. And so Jonah does that. He eventually talks them into throwing him overboard because he can't do it himself for whatever reason. And as soon as he hits the water, everything calms down. It's almost as if once you stop running from God, the chaos that defines your life starts to grow calm. And the sailors are in awe of this and how quickly things change, and they start to worship God and give sacrifices to him and thank him for saving them. And Jonah resigns himself to eventually sink to the bottom of the ocean. And yet God had another plan. Flaws and brokenness and all, God was not done with Jonah. And so he provided him a way back. Now, being swallowed by a huge fish probably wasn't Jonah's preferred method of being rescued, but it was one example, yet again, of God's grace. That even though Jonah had tried to run from God, even though he didn't deserve any mercy from God, God was right there, ready to rescue him as soon as he stopped running. And that's the lesson. No matter what you have been doing, no matter how you've been running from God, no matter how long you've been doing it, you can't outrun the grace of God. And it doesn't matter if you've been running because you're confused or you feel inadequate or you think you can run your life better. As long as you have been running, God has been pursuing you. And I want you to think about what it's cost you to keep running. What chaos has been in your life? What price have you had to pay? What price have the people around you had to pay because you weren't willing to do what the God who loves you and is for you has asked you to do? And maybe you're listening right now and you think that you are too far gone, but you cannot outrun the grace of God. Tim Keller, in one of his articles on Christmas, put it this way. He said, yes, as many have said, salvation is a gift, but it's unlike any gift you've seen. Imagine unwrapping a mirror and holding up to your face. Yeah, your acne is breaking out again. Or you take a look at your posterior and realize just how much weight you've gained over the holidays. That's the kind of gift the gospel is. It lets us see who we really are. But the good news is that we are truly embraced for who we really are. We are far more flawed than we could ever imagine. We are far more accepted than we could ever dare hope. We are cowards and racists and control freaks and addicts, but the Lord still loves us just the same. And He wants to make us to look more and more like Him. Yes, He wants us to repent from all those acts and attitudes, no doubt. But if we belong to Him like Jonah, there's no option where His grace can't find us. You may flee from Him with all your might, but you cannot outrun grace. So, my encouragement to you is to ask yourself if you have been running from God. And if you're finally ready to stop, see where His grace might just find you right where you are.